Okay, good morning, everyone. I am going to get started. It is now 11:30 Eastern Time. Thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to ask each of you to please keep your phones on mute during the session. This is a live session, and therefore we can hear the background noise. My name is Rosa Schmidt. I'm with the Center for Energy Workforce Development, and I welcome all of you to EnergyCareers 2021. This week is Careers in Energy Week, and we're excited about that. Welcome to our panel. Our panel this morning is focused on the innovative future of the energy industry and the really cool jobs that it offers and careers that we have. I'm proof of that. I grew up in the industry and just love everything about it. So I'm going to get started without further ado. Just a reminder, we will entertain questions at the end of the session. So if you have any questions, I'll ask you to please add them to the chat feature. And as we move through the session, I will ask the panelists those questions. We will not open it up for live questions, but I will take them from the chat feature. So feel free to add your questions throughout the sessions as we move forward. Let me go ahead and start without further ado in introducing our panelists. I'm excited to present two great speakers that will be talking about their careers in the energy industry. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Sashi Magnoli. She is a power generation engineer at Florida Power and Light. Welcome, Sashi. And Carlos Noel. Carlos is the Vice President of Business Development at National Grid. Welcome, Carlos. Glad to have you both join us this morning. I am not going to read their bios. We want to get right to the meat of this session, and the bios can be found under resources. So once you click on resources again, and you'll see the bios listed there, and you'll be able to read about Carlos and Sashi. Thank you. So let's get started. I'm going to start with you, Carlos. Carlos, you're in business development at National Grid. Tell us a little bit about what you do. What is business development, and what does your day look like?
Sure. Thanks for the invitation to the panel. So my title, actually, I don't think it describes what I get to do. I always tell people that I'm one of the lucky ones that gets to play with all the fun and cool technologies that are happening in the energy space. So my team, it's really responsible for kind of finding ways to modernize the electric system. So the electric system is really old. And what my team is responsible for, it's really trying to modernize and make sure we have more visibility, we have more data, and we use analytics to then use that data to get better at the way we operate things. But it's also really helping National Grid to get to this future, a clean energy future that we all aspire to. So I'm responsible for thinking about how do we create an environment where electric vehicles are possible, where batteries become an important part of how do we manage the electric system, how do we integrate solar. So it's really an opportunity for me to really transform what this industry is. This is an industry that's been in place for hundreds of years, and we are at a tipping point where we're really going to change the way we generate and use electricity, right? Not only from the traditional central powers that we used to have, but now it's all about solar, and it's about wind, and it's about storage. And on the usage side, we become more dependent on energy, right? Whether it's for powering our computers, our phones, our laptops, but more importantly, how we think about heating and transportation for those of you that have heating requirements. So I get to experience with a lot of those things, both from a business perspective and from a technology perspective.
Sounds lots of fun. Cool projects. And we'll talk more a little bit, because I think I have a couple of more questions around a little bit more detail around that. Sashi, I'm going to go to you now. You're an engineer, and I'm wondering, our audience is probably very interested in understanding, what does an engineer do for an energy company? So I'd like you to talk a little bit about what you do at Florida Power and Light.
Great, thank you, Rosa. I'd be happy to. So, as Rosa mentioned, I am an engineer and I actually work on the instrumentation and controls team. So, I work in controls engineering, which is essentially all of the logic behind how a power plant runs. I think there's a misconception that a lot of power plants require a lot of manual actions, but there is an entire scheme of controls logic that drives those actions. And part of what I do is work on an automation team. And what we're looking to do in the long term is ultimately automate a lot of these manual tasks and go through and deploy a lot of IoT or wireless sensors and look at completing a lot of automation um, logic improvements and work through making our power plants much more sustainable and operating them remotely if possible. So that's a lot of what I do on the team that I'm on. But riffing off of what Carlos said, I think we really are at a turning point in our industry. And as we drive forward with making our power plants much more automated and constantly improving them to bring them into the future, we're doing that on the fossil side to keep up with the technological improvements that we're seeing in battery and solar and the renewable space as well.
Sounds exciting. That's great. That's great. So, Sashi, you said, so you're a chemical engineer?
I am. Yeah, I know I work in
Oh,
control
it's,
engineering
it's
now.
interesting. I'd love to hear a little bit more because you're talking about working with, this technology, and yet you're a chemical engineer. So I want you to talk about two things. First of all, I want you to go back and really talk about how did you even figure out you wanted to be a chemical engineer? This panel is for high school students, and so we're wondering, some of them might be asking themselves, what's a chemical engineer do? And so how did you come about ever even realizing you wanted to be a chemical engineer?
So honestly, I kind of lucked into it. I When I was in high school, so I'm local to the Southeast Florida area, and when I was in high school, I had no idea what I wanted to do, and I had a chemistry class and math classes, and I was in AP versions of both of those, and I was looking at this major selection that colleges give you. If anyone's in the process of applying to college, you have to select a major with your application. And I had no idea what I wanted to do, absolutely none. But I loved chemistry and I loved math. And I thought, oh, chemical engineering is perfect. It'll combine those two things. Turns out I was very wrong. That's not what chemical engineering does at all. A lot of people think that it's mixing chemicals in beakers and working with actual chemicals and having a lot of chemistry involved in it. And it's really not. And I was surprised by that as well. I wound up getting into college and finding out that I actually loved the major. I think my first class was mass and energy balances, which is essentially the process of having some sort of process function, whether it's a distillation column or a liquid vapor extractor, but taking that mass and energy balance and proving how you're maintaining it throughout the system. That class showed me that I loved the major I chose. I happened to completely fall in love with the rest of my classes. They really focused on thermo and heat transfer, and I loved those subjects. And I had no idea that those courses were going to be part of my curriculum when I chose the major. And I wound up really looking into my profession. I didn't know I wanted to work in the energy industry. I had no idea that I was going to find this profession, and beyond that, I had no idea I would love the controls engineering field, and lucked into this job I have now as well. And actually, I think my internships with energy companies. So I've interned for 2 summers with NextEra Energy, which is the parent company of Florida Power and Light. And in those 2 summer internships, I got all of this exposure to the energy industry because chemical engineering really is geared more towards oil and petroleum, and you don't hear as much about the energy industry and how relevant chemical engineering is to how a power plant operates. And I think more than anything, I learned that engineering teaches you a school of thought and a way of thinking more than it teaches you specific equations, because especially nowadays, and I'm sure high school students know this, you can Google anything you need to find. Like, you don't need to know how to calculate um, the mass or energy balance or like standard pressures, you don't need those pieces of information. What you do need is how to get a problem and troubleshoot it all the way to completion, and be able to work through these obstacles that you may encounter in the real world. It's the practicality piece that I think
Right.
engineering brings to the table.
That's great. Great. Thank you. Carlos, I'm going to ask you the same question. How did you get into the energy industry, business development? So for those that are saying, well, I don't want to be an engineer, how can I get into the energy industry? So we'd love to hear more about your journey.
Yeah, so I have, so if I can leave you with something, I didn't have it all figured out either. I'm actually an engineer, but I actually also ended up as an engineer by pure luck. I mean, I liked math. I was good at it. And when I started college, so I'm originally from Venezuela, so that's where I went to college. And I had to pick a major the same way that Sashi did it. And I'm like, I'm an industrial engineer. And for those of you that don't know what that is everyone makes fun of industrial engineers because they say that we are not really engineers. We're just people with business backgrounds that call themselves engineers. But in reality, our job is to make things more efficient, run plans, process improvement, and all of that. And my first job, actually my internship, was at a local utility company back in Venezuela, and it was actually doing transmission lines. So if you've ever been anywhere across the U.S. and you see those big towers, big wires that cross the country, that's a transmission line. So essentially, they're like the biggest power systems that move most of the electricity across the U.S. And I kind of got into that job without really knowing much about it. But as I did the internship, one of the things that I remember still to this day was I was doing something on like systems and improving cycle times, something like technical related to my career. And one day we had a massive storm, and essentially we lost a significant part of the transmission system, which meant that a lot of people were without power. And I was probably still early 20s, like probably 2021, I guess. And I remember seeing myself in the field with people working, I don't know, 18-hour shifts for the biggest purpose, which is to bring power back. And that actually stick with me because I always tell people, you don't always get to, so a lot of people get to do a job, right? And it doesn't matter what the job is, you get to do a job and you can make it fulfilling. But one of the things you get in this industry is you have a significant impact on society, right? Electricity is one of those things that no one really thinks about. They only think about 8 minutes a year, just as a reference point. But when it's gone, everyone knows that it's gone, right? It's one of those few services that you don't really think about it, but when it's gone, you know it's gone. And I can tell you that actually kind of left that imprint in my life because I realized that I was just doing more than just doing this cool cycle time thing. I was actually doing really meaningful work for society, and that actually mattered a lot to me. And it's interesting because I did that work for a couple of years, and then I left the industry, did a bunch of other jobs in supply chain, which is what that was my background. Which now looking back and given the current environment, I wish I would have stayed in supply chain, but it's a different discussion. And I joined National Grid, which is a utility in the Northeast. And I actually, out of all places, I started in supply chain. And supply chain, in simple terms, is like buying stuff, putting them in warehouses, and getting them to places where they're needed. And I did that, and I loved the job. But I really wanted to be closer to kind of doing the service that we provide to customers every single day. And I found my way into the customer organization, which is the group that serves directly the consumers. And I got to do this job doing a smart grid program, which I can tell you when I did it the first time, I had no idea what smart grid was. But I learned, I worked with a lot of talented people, and I realized that I could actually make a difference beyond just even keeping power on, but actually making an impact on the environment. And I can tell you, part of the job I do today, it's really trying to create this clean energy future. And I actually have a personal reason for it. I have younger kids, and I want to make sure that the future they live, it's a better one than the one I had. And that entails having electric vehicles. That entails having solar panels in a lot of homes. And my job is really making that happen. And just one thing before I wrap it up, Rosa, I think you talked about kind of engineers. I can tell you, I'm an engineer, but I don't really do a lot of engineering work, and I work with a lot of people that are not engineers. In this environment, we need people that market things. We need people that keep the numbers straight. We need people that are really good with computers. And the reality is, this industry, um, it's creating so many opportunities for people. And it is one of those few places, as you think about your career, where you're going to be able to do a job and make a significant impact for the environment and the world.
Yeah. And, Carlos, you talked about the various jobs that you've had in the industry. And so the growth potential, I think, and the ability to move around in a company, and your career grows, but you don't have to leave the company you're in. So
Absolutely.
to me, that was one of the things when I started. I started as a clerk down at the entry level position saying, okay, it's just an entry level position. But quickly I rose through with education. They paid for education, tuition reimbursement. And before I knew it, I was in a senior position. And I'll tell you, and I was never bored, never bored. And I think that's kind of what I'm hearing from you, Carlos.
Absolutely. I'll tell you just a 30-second story. I have one of the directors in my team, who I actually think is one of the most talented individuals, actually started as a meter reader. And for those of you that don't know what a meter reader is, in the past, we actually had a human being go into every single house, looking at your electric meter and seeing how much you were using so we can actually bill you. That is one of the entry level jobs we have in the company. That person, because that person did that job, has had more opportunities on National Grid than I can ever imagine. And it gave him a true appreciation of the whole process of what it takes to actually get power to every single home. And that's what I tell people. The best employees I've seen are those that have bounced around within the company, that have started either in the call center, as a meter reader, on the field, and then have progressed, to Rosa's point, getting the education that most utilities pay for, to really kind of get to the next level. And I can tell you, it is a fantastic opportunity, not because I work at this company, but it is one of those places where it doesn't matter what you want to do, you can find it within the company.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's so true because even in Florida Power and Light, FPL has people that are now in these, really high power positions. They're directors, they're managers, and they started in the company doing something as simple as being an outside operator at a power plant where they walked out and inspected pumps and motors, or I think I know somebody who actually started as low as a janitor. And so I think if you start in these trade positions, we have wind techs and people that are out there doing inverter checks for our solar sites. We have so many positions that can translate so well. And I think the energy industry as a whole, especially these companies that have their foothold in different aspects of energy. So if you've got a company that has wind, solar, battery storage, upcoming pilot opportunities, electric vehicles, we've got all kinds of opportunities in the energy industry that are really tangentially related to power and energy, but the skills that you learn as you transition through all of these roles. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it, I actually started the company in a rotational program. And I think now the senior leadership, like Carlos, they're recognizing the value of having candidates who have had a lot of different experiences early on. So as we rotate through these different teams and go through these types of rotational programs early in our career, we start to get that experience of bouncing around and picking up things really quickly and learning as much as we can in short periods of time. And I think that just speaks to the changing industry, because I think like, earlier on these rotational programs or programs like that weren't very common. So as we transitioned, I think leadership started to recognize that there's a lot of value in having candidates that have different types of experiences, because Carlos, as you mentioned, is an industrial engineer and is now doing business development, and I'm a chemical engineer and doing controls engineering. I think as we move around, we're really just adding more tools to our tool belt.
Yeah, I was in human resources, and I started as a clerk, and started to realize I didn't even know I wanted to do human resources. But that's something that I was introduced to in the company, and said, "Wow, so great." Sashi, I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about internships, because we're talking to high school students. If you can just talk a little bit about your internships and how you found Florida Power and Light, and because these students, you're in high school, once you start going to college, and you go to college, even for high school students, we hire and bring them in as interns so that they can start to learn different aspects. Can you talk a little bit about your internships? That's would be helpful.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I interned the summers of 2017 and 2016. So I graduated from college in 2018 and joined full-time then. So I've been full-time for about 3 years now. So the internship experience, I guess the first thing I can say is just do it. Just go out and get any internship, get all of the experience that you can. I think we've stressed this pretty significantly, that it's a matter of just getting something that might show you what you want to do. And I think when I started, my first internship was actually on the chemistry and environmental teams, and I did a project on curtailing wind turbines to avoid bat kills. So in Canada, there's a lot of regulations surrounding wind turbine operation during bat migration season and bat mating season. And my project was on that. It was on wind turbine curtailment. So we don't run wind turbines at time periods where there's going to be a lot of bats in the sky, because we don't want to risk a bat potentially running into a wind turbine. And that first internship experience just taught me so much about how the energy industry operates, and some small inklings, very small aspects of the energy industry. And from there, my next summer internship was in tribology, which is lube oil particle analysis. So I made a full 180 and switched from some part of the industry that was very regulatory and very focused on regulations to a part of the industry that was very technical and focused on the shapes and sizes of metal particulates in lube oil. So any internship that you get can provide you a lot of experience in how the energy industry operates. And honestly, I fell in love with the company. I fell in love with the culture. So many aspects of the energy industry are not necessarily forgotten, but you don't realize how impactful they are. And it's a 24/7 business. And I think we have so many opportunities to explore that and to continue to expand in that 24/7 business. We're always going to need power. It's not really an industry that's ever going to become obsolete. So I think that knowing that and having that exposure in those internships is really what drove me into a career in energy. I again had no idea I wanted to be a chemical engineer. And I knew even less about wanting to join the energy industry. And it's not something that's marketed. You hear about these massive companies like Chevron and Exxon, and no one really hears as much about National Grid and FPL.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Sashi. Carlos, I'm gonna kind of switch a little bit, and I'd like to ask you both the same question, but really talk about the innovative projects that the industry, because I think very often we think about, okay, you generate power, you transmit the power, it gets to the houses, that's it. But there's so much innovation happening, and I know, Carlos, you alluded to some of that. Can I ask you to talk a little bit about some of the projects, and then Sashi, please feel free to add on, and then talk a little bit about, and I think, Carlos, you mentioned some of the various types of jobs that can be done, but maybe you can also talk a little bit about that. And then Sashi, I'd love to hear from you as well.
Sure. So I'll give you one example that it's near and dear to my heart, which is electric transportation. So if I always tell people, if you really think about where we are in kind of in the time in history, like I can imagine at the time where everyone was riding on horses and suddenly there was a car and it's like, wow, this was a big change. Like we went from being in an animal, now we're on a machine that actually moves us. And that has been the case for hundreds of years. And now we're at this point where we're actually going to change what that looks like. And I'll tell you one area that it's been really interesting. So many of you actually use this probably every day, which is school buses, right? So school buses are one of the largest in most cities. They have a high contribution to the emissions, right? So they're not the cleanest vehicles on the road. And they run every single day except for the summer. And in the summer, they also get used. And interesting enough, they actually are used on a pretty defined pattern, right? So they drive in the mornings and they kind of come back to a place, and then they leave in the afternoon, go and drop off kids and come back. And one of the things that we've been working with a couple of school districts is how do we electrify those buses, right? And it actually has been a fascinating project just to understand from a behavioral perspective, how do you actually run a school bus system? What time do you clean them up? How do you fuel them? Where do you do maintenance? All of that. Um, but more importantly, right, what if you were to change them to electric? How do you charge them, right? So we figured that part out. And one of the things that we realize is that we also then have now a bunch of batteries that are sitting in the same location. We know roughly what the times that they're going to be charging. We also know the times when they're not going to be used. So you can then use them as electric buses to move kids around, but you also use them for using them as batteries that then can help the electric grid during summer days when it's really hot or during certain times when the grid actually needs the help. So why I think that's a fascinating project. So you would have never thought about a utility company being involved in anything like that, right? It's probably the last thing that people would think. And I can tell you, to make that project happen, we needed people in sales that actually just went out and convinced the customer that this was a good idea. Same way you sell products. We definitely needed engineers to figure out all the mechanics, right? Um, we needed marketing and communications people to tell their story, right? Because that was the only way we were going to get the traction with other districts and municipalities. We needed people that were in politics, right? Because we needed to convince our regulators that we should use money and incentives for the school district so they could actually go and do the work. We need finance people to make sure that the numbers and what we're saying, both internally for National Grid, but also for that school district, that the cost of running electric school buses was actually better than the diesel school buses that they were dealing. So when you think about just a one project, you think about the number of people that need to come together to make it happen. And I would say the last one, which is probably one of the areas that it's growing the most, it's really the IT and data world, right? Like what are the charging patterns? How many miles are buses driving? Are they changing their usage? What does that mean for when the grid is being used? And the reality is it's fascinating how kind of one project can bring people so many different places in the organization to make it happen. And again, they're not all engineers. So it is a fascinating thing that if you see an electric bus or electric school bus, think about all the number of people that actually go behind that to make it happen. And to me, again, it's one of those things that you're not just doing a project, you're actually kind of changing how something we use every single day works.
Great.
Yeah. And I think in something that Carlos said that I think resonates is how much change we're affecting. So from an innovation standpoint, something that's really close to my heart is we have gone through and deployed wireless sensors to automate manual tasks. So when I say that, I mean a previous manual task, an example of it might be going to observe the oil level in a piece of equipment. So when I say observe the oil level on a piece of equipment, I mean if we're going to take a look at, let's say, a pump or a motor, they're running on oil in order to lubricate the bearings in that pump or motor. So for that particular task, we have then deployed a wireless sensor that will tell us if the oil level is getting low so that we can then just go replenish the oil. And taking a power plant that wasn't constructed to be automated and working to automate it is something really innovative that we're trying to do to make the future of these power plants much more streamlined. And I think as we look at ultimately automating some of these little tasks, we're trying to communicate this data. I know Carlos mentioned data is something that's changing in the IT world, and we're trying to communicate what we call big data. So all of the data coming from these wireless devices is now being transferred to all of these algorithms that we're then developing and generating and using to determine whether an action needs to be taken by the local site team. And when we bring in the data, we're now bringing in cybersecurity. So there's so many aspects of the energy industry that have to be subject to these really stringent cybersecurity rules. You know, I think Carlos mentioned when power goes down, there's an impact, an immediate impact to society. And what we've seen from ransomware to malware to not just individual hackers, but different government entities impacting our nation's energy system. That's where we start to see innovation in the cyber world. We have to maintain these cybersecurity guidelines in order to keep our customers protected. So now we're working to innovate in the digital transformation age. We're working to keep up with the technological improvements and the changes and make our society ultimately less dependent on these different sources of energy, automate them and bring in new technology and bring in these electric vehicles, bring in smart meters, bring in wireless sensors, and doing all of that while managing the data and keeping up with our data changes. I think that is the biggest innovation that we strive for right now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I know that Florida Power and Light and National Grid use drones. And, you know, that has been in existence for a couple of years, but you're using drones daily to check lines and transmission lines and power and underground as well. And so it's really exciting technology. In addition to some of the technology and the work that's being done that you all talked about, there's also those that want to work with their hands. If they want to work with their hands, we've got so many jobs where, okay, I really don't want to go to a 4-year degree, but I'd love to work with my hands. And we've got a tremendous number of jobs out there. Any of you can talk. And Sashi, I think you're sideways. If you can turn your phone, that would be appreciated. So Carlos, Sashi, if you want to just chime in and just mention some of the jobs that we have in the industry.
Sure. I'll give you a couple of things. And before I answer that, just one thing I wanted to piggyback from what Sashi was saying.
Sure.
When I know a lot of people these days, if you're probably in high school or thinking about going to college or looking for a job, everyone's thinking, I want to work in Google, I want to work in Facebook, I want to work in Apple. And I can tell you from experience, all of those companies right now, they're investing heavily in becoming part of the energy play, right? For the same reasons that Sashi talked about, right? They're looking at all the data that is being produced, and that actually can be a huge way to make a difference. They all are making commitments that they're going to try to help us to get to a clean energy future. So it's not just the utilities. Like I can tell you, the industry, it's growing so much, and so many companies are now becoming part of it, that even if you work for a company like PepsiCo or Coca-Cola, like they have a huge energy team just to look at how they power their facilities. How do they actually become more environmentally friendly? It is a huge opportunity. So in terms of the amount of work, I'll give you 3 examples, and we're desperately needing more people. First one, it's energy efficiency, right? So one of the big programs we run as a company is we run energy efficiency programs. And that essentially means we go to customers' homes or businesses, and we help them to make their homes more efficient. We put new insulation, we change light bulbs, we change boilers, furnaces, whatever, right? We spend something like $300-400 million a year doing that work. And that is all trade work in the field that it's needed. It's going to continue to grow. It's desperately necessary. And we need people that can actually want to do that work. The second area where we see a big demand is solar, right? Solar installers, both at the residential level, but also at the utility scale. So people that can put panels, that can do permitting, that can do construction. Huge opportunity, huge area for us. And then the last one, which is becoming more prevalent in the last few years, is really around electric vehicle stations. So how do you put a station, do all the underground work, all the electrical work into the panels, put in the stations, doing maintenance for the stations, doing the analytics. Those are all technical jobs, and the industry desperately needs more people to join us, because we cannot keep up with the number of people we need to do all the work that we have to do to hit some of the clean energy goals.
Sashi, do you want to add to that?
I think more than anything. Oh, yep. Let me know if you can hear me. Okay. I think more than anything, I think the most important thing to add there, and I think Carlos really captured it well, is the need for the additional workforce. And I think this is an industry that's growing while we might see some other industries start to become stagnant. And part of our innovative future is expanding that workforce and getting those people in the right places. And I think it's just such an expanding workforce, and there's no geographic restriction to the energy industry, right? So we have wind in 37 states, and there's no place that you could want to live where you're not going to find a career in the energy industry. And I don't think we don't have these central hubs like what you see in California, where you might see a hub for the Googles and the Microsofts and the Windows. We don't have that type of central hub. We impact the entire country. So we have energy centers that require being powered from, desert in Arizona all the way to, you might see the wind sites in the Oklahoma Midwest region. So I think having that workforce and growing it and making sure that it's accessible to everybody is going to be huge for this energy transition.
Yeah. And just one last data point, Rosa. For us, over the next 5 to 10 years, we're looking at upwards of 70% of our field force and people that are in engineering roles that will be retiring over that horizon. That means that essentially we need to start filling that pipeline now so we can transfer the knowledge, get people ready, because those roles, they'll continue to be there. The people are just moving on, right? One of the things you will find in this transition in the energy space is when I started, everyone were long-term tenure employees. Like I remember first job and it's like, oh, how long have you been here? Oh, 30 years, 35 years, 20 years. Like if you were only 10 years, you were like a rookie in the company. And I can tell you that has changed a lot. Like we now have people that have been here a couple of years, right? And the distribution of the kind of demographics of the people that work for the company has changed a lot. So I would really encourage everyone to really think about it as an option, because the reality is, as Sashi was saying, it is a growing industry, and we are losing a lot of that long tenured talent because they're just going to retire. So.
And the jobs are evolving, they're changing, they're getting more technology. So even those hands-on jobs, they've got in their trucks, they've got a computer, they've got a laptop, iPad, and they're able to do their work orders and get information. And so everything is electronic. It's evolving, and so jobs are changing. Absolutely. Just a mention on our site, getintooenergy.com. If you anyone going there can see we have over 6,000 jobs posted every single day available across the US. And so there are jobs, and it's constant. It doesn't fluctuate. It doesn't go really down. And it's kind of, and last year we had 5,000, even with COVID, with a lot of companies not hiring, we had over 5,000 job openings. And so the jobs are there and they continue to grow. So I think we're getting close to the end of our session, and I would like to just ask each of you to at least give us one piece of advice for the audience that is here, for the students that are listening today. If there's one piece of advice that you have for them, what would that be?
Sashi, I'll let you go first.
Okay, Sasha.
Okay, I think she might have froze.
Are you on mute?
I think she froze, so I'll buy time for her. I'll say for me, probably the biggest advice I can give people is don't feel intimidated by the industry, right? I think a lot of people think, well, if I want to work at a utility, first it has to be like really technical. I need to be great at math and great at something. It doesn't really have to be the case. As I've said before, there's a lot of different roles across this industry that you can play a role in. And I think the second part of it, and it's just a reflection for everyone. I think there might be there's some feedback that I'm getting.
If you have your phone, can you mute your phone? Those that are participating, much appreciated.
And I would say the last thing is, look, I think one of the things that I've been seeing in younger generations is everyone wants to do a job, but it's no longer about just doing a job, right? I think before my parents, my grandparents, they had a job for life and that was it, right? I think now people are looking for something with a purpose. And I can tell you the energy space offers you the opportunity to have a really meaningful job, a good paying job, but a job that is actually driven by a real mission on a real problem that we have that we need to solve. So I think there's not that many places where you can actually do that.
Sashi, you're on mute. You're on mute, Sashi.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. I think I've recovered from my technical difficulties, hopefully. I guess that's my sign to keep this short and sweet. So I guess the one piece of advice I think I would have for everybody on the call is to really make sure that you're informed with the innovations in the energy industry and how practical that knowledge can be and how prevalent it is. I think, going back to something I mentioned earlier, I think this is an industry that's constantly growing. We're constantly in need of new people and fresh blood, and we're trying to keep pace with, as Carlos said, the mass exodus of this older generation we're going to see. And knowing all of that, I think the energy industry is one where we don't have a lot of visibility. We're kind of in the background. We're keeping the lights on and the hospitals running and the emergency services accessible. And I think those are all, something from as simple as using your phone every day and charging it every day. I think those are all small components that add up to this massive Goliath of an industry. And making sure that you understand how many opportunities are out there and just doing them. And, I think you can hear from the difference in experiences between myself, Carlos, and Rosa, that just taking the leap and the plunge and finding a job that might give you some growth opportunity. I think that's honestly the biggest thing I can say is make the connections, start taking those interviews, and those initial interviews set you up for success. If it's one bad interview or one potentially questionable job that you don't know if you want, or you have a couple bad experiences, those all set you up for long-term success.
Great. Thank you, Sashi. Thank you, Carlos. You were amazing. Thank you for everything that you shared. I want to thank, and I want to just mention to everyone that's in attendance here, please go check out the booths. I believe both the companies have a booth. Carlos, I think at National Grid has a booth, and so does Flower Power and Light, Nextera. Go check them out, go talk to them. But please check out also the other panels that we have for the rest of the session. Thank you again. You were amazing, and thank you all for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks for the invitation.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.